memory of Comrade Martin Tembisile Chris Hani, long live. Long live. Long live the fighting memory of Comrade Chris Hani, long live. Long live. Long live President Jacob Zuma, long live. Long live President Jacob Zuma, long live. Thank you very much, comrades. Thank you very much for a warm welcome. House Limpo and the family, good evening. It's lovely to be with you tonight. She looks like she's still in her 50s. She looks very pretty. Comrade Mzwandile and Mrs. Masina, the executive mayor of Ekurhuleni, the executive mayor of Mbizana, Comrade Daniswa Mafumbati, Speaker of Ekurhuleni, Comrade Patricia Kumalo, Whip of Ekurhuleni, Jongzizu Zabati, Comrade Makhosandile Mpetwa, members of the REC of the ANC Ekurhuleni, leadership of the leagues from Ekurhuleni, Tshwane, and elsewhere. I saw Comrade Lesego here among us tonight. I see many comrades, faces that when we were still called youth ourselves, we were with. I note particularly Comrade Mbongeni, Kumalo. It is nice to have you here. It is a sense of nervousness and profound privilege that I accepted the invitation to speak here tonight at the Chris Hani Memorial Lecture. Immediately I was reminded of the funeral oration of Pericles in 431 BC, where he said, I quote, "I could have wished that the reputations of many brave men were not to be imperiled in the mouth of a single individual, to fall or stand accordingly as he spoke well or ill," close quote. Indeed, my mind could not escape the immense fact that in accepting to do this talk tonight, I had accepted the heavy responsibility to talk of a man in whose footsteps I always wonder if I am worthy to walk, or whose name I may not even be worthy to talk about. Chris Hani was too large a figure in the movement for him, his life and legacy, to be subjected to the single mouth of an individual, to stand or fall accordingly as he speaks well or ill. It behoves those of us left behind to recount for those that were not there the contribution that such individuals made to the lives of our people and their cause for freedom. For nobody among us tonight should take for granted the mammoth effort it took, the immense struggle and sacrifices required from both individuals and freedom fighters alike to free South Africa. Accordingly, when such occasions arise, that we should reflect on the lives of our freedom fighters, the midwives of our freedom, the icons and martyrs of our struggle. We should take care never to use their names to divide, but to unite. never to destroy but to build, never to sow hopelessness and foreboding, but to cultivate hope and optimism. The glorious piece of earth on which he made his final stand of racial supremacy and the criminal acts of its lunatic supporters, but
Well, that was the Finance Minister, Malusi Gigaba, speaking in Boksburg at the Chris Hani Memorial Lecture, because 24 years ago today, the SACP struggle stalwart was assassinated, and there have been memorials taking place today, particularly the one attended by the President in Boksburg this afternoon. Let's take a quick break, and when we're back, we'll catch you up with today's headlines.
about what they are planning, quote unquote. Indeed, his prophecy and premonition, born not out of a vainglorious desire to become a martyr, but of the cold facts before him, were to come true in the morning of Saturday, 10th of April 1993, as he was mowed down at his home in Boksburg. Instantly, and in a callous way, our entire nation was thrust into the verge of the precipice and found itself standing face to face with a racial conflagration that threatened to consume all of us and reverse the many painstaking years of working on a peaceful political settlement that would have ended the apartheid colonial system. This single act would summon to the fore the intellect, the courage and principles of the ANC leadership, upon whose shoulders alone now fell the heavy responsibility to either restore calm and harness the anger of the masses, or to unleash evil itself. They themselves could have decided to pull the plug on the peace effort and pull the trigger to let the hellfire loose to consume all of us. Let nobody be in any doubt that that day would have easily turned into a calamity that would have plunged our country into its most bitter, bloodiest and most devastating racial civil war, from which both black and white would have suffered untold pains, losses and destruction. Comrade Chris had foreseen this, that in how the regime had meticulously demonized him and painted him as the very epitome of evil, was both an invitation to the lunatic fringe to send assassins after him in an attempt to try to stall our freedom, intimidate the oppressed, and tear our nation apart. And it was also a most vile attempt to ensure that should this eventuality happen, as it did happen, the oppressed must not feel that his assassination was not justified. Of course, on both occasions, the regime was to fail dismally, as the movement would not allow Comrade Chris' assassination, no matter how provocative, callous, and divisive it was, to be used to derail the freedom the masses that loved him so much and that he himself had worked so hard for. The prompt and brave act by the white lady that witnessed the assassination and alerted the police, leading to the capture and eventual successful prosecution of the assassins, contributed immensely to bringing our nation back from the precipice. Aware of the gravity of the situation and the threat that faced us all, the ANC leadership, led by President Mandela, promptly addressed the nation and immediately outlined a program of action that would channel the anger of the masses, leading to Comrade Chris' funeral, and above all else, focus the attention of the nation towards the goal of the struggle in general and of Chris' actions in particular. As a young person during that time, like my fellow youth activists, we were angry. We were hurt, confused, and seeking vengeance. This decisive action by the leadership of the movement helped me and fellow members of my generation to focus on the task at hand and the goal before us. President Mandela would say, I quote, "This is a watershed moment for all of us. Our decisions and actions will determine whether we use our pain, our grief, and our outrage to move forward to what is the only lasting solution for our country, an elected government of the people, by the people, for the people," close quote. He went further to address himself to the people of South Africa in general and the youth in particular, acknowledging that we were a nation in mourning, and concluded his statement by saying, I quote, "Chris Hani has made the supreme sacrifice. The greatest tribute we can pay to his life's work is to ensure we win that freedom for all our people," close quote. In the days that were to follow, the ANC remained steadfast and unmoved in its call for disciplined action and demand for a date of elections as the only form of appeasement for the oppressed if they were to continue remaining disciplined and not succumb to the temptation for vengeance. In this way, the ANC leadership successfully captured the mood of the moment, clearly articulated the fundamental demands of the oppressed, and yet spoke to all of society about the need to unite around their anger and that which divided them, but not just around their anger and that which divided them, but around the urgent questions of the day, that is, the liberation of the oppressed, the removal of injustice in our country, and the creation of democracy for all. I have spoken at such great lengths about what happened on the day of April 10, 1993, and the days that followed that unforgettable moment, in order to address myself to the issues towards which I wish immediately to move at some length, which relate to the urgency for united national action to accelerate economic growth in an inclusive manner. South Africans must unite around inclusive growth. If we remain locked into opposing and fractious camps based on ideological, party, racial, and class affiliation, accelerated and inclusive growth will not be achieved, and the lives of ordinary South Africans will become all the more difficult. This route benefits no one, neither the advantaged minority nor the disadvantaged majority. We need not pretend we do not have differences. Rather, we must not fixate on our differences. We must find common ground. Inclusive growth is that common ground. We do not have to agree on everything, but surely we can agree that it will be better for all of us if the economy grows, jobs are created, and more South Africans participate in the economy than currently is the case. Economic growth is a necessary but not sufficient condition for inclusive national development. Growth is not automatically inclusive, and growth without inclusion is divisive in that it reinforces not only the social disparities prevalent in our society today, but in addition it reinforces racial and gender divisions and polarization. Economic growth creates a conducive platform for pursuing inclusive development objectives. When firms are expanding, they are more likely to hire workers. When the economy is creating more opportunities, workers are more likely to find suitable work and have the bargaining power to negotiate for better wages and conditions of employment. But above it all, more jobs create more people involved in productive economic activities with disposable incomes, and thus the economy expands further. A growing economy generates more revenue for government to provide services, fund social support for vulnerable groups, and invest in infrastructure and other development programs. But we must also agree on inclusion. We need national unity behind inclusive growth. The South African economy is fundamentally exclusive, excluding black people, excluding women, and excluding the youth from meaningful participation in ownership, senior management, and skilled work to varying degrees. This is not sustainable. This fact is at the heart of our societal divisions. We remain one of the most unequal countries in the world with extraordinary high concentration of wealth. 10% of the population owns 95% of the nation's wealth. This results in drastically different standards of living for a tiny elite and small middle class, alongside a large and struggling poor and working class majority. Inequality of such devastating scale can only lead to further social dysfunction and division. By drifting away from the inclusive growth program, we end up in a situation where the main political and social campaigns become individuals rather than the gist of the matter: unemployment, poverty, and inequality. The wealthy and privileged need to open their eyes to the fundamental injustice and unsustainability of this situation, and must equally accept responsibility for its removal. A society in which the majority is excluded is dangerous and unstable. A more equitable society is in everyone's interest. It is time for our country to unite. Government, the opposition, business, labor, and civil society must come together to advance inclusive growth. One of the most important interventions we must make is to address youth unemployment. Youth in South Africa find it difficult to participate in the economy. Research has shown how critical it is for young people to find employment soon after leaving the education system. We must take bold initiatives like the call to create 1 million internships for youth in 3 years. Government and business need to collaborate to ensure young people access training, apprenticeship, and employment opportunities. All of this must be addressed within the environment of fiscal consolidation and prudence. This is not a neoliberal capitulation. We have done this before. When faced with inordinate economic challenges, that we exercise fiscal discipline whilst at the same time continuing to increase our spending on education, health, and social services, and in the course of time, we could even increasingly invest in social and economic infrastructure. Our careful financial management and low debt levels were invaluable going into the global financial crisis and ensuing economic downturn. It gave us the space to maintain high social spending and investment in infrastructure to counter the depressed economic cycle. We must now exercise discipline in containing spending and stabilizing public debt, precisely so that we can maintain our financial independence as a nation. This moment calls for urgent national unity around maintaining the fiscal ceiling agreed to in the budget of 2017, whilst we do not relent in implementing infrastructure rollout efficiently, paying serious attention to adhering to project timelines. In this regard, it becomes critical to strengthen the governance and financial sustainability of our state-owned companies so that they become engines and enablers of inclusive growth and not obstacles to it. We need to govern our state-owned companies properly, with clear direction and accountability between government and, as shareholder, the boards, chief executives and executive committees. Managed well, state-owned companies can develop infrastructure, unlock economic activity, develop skills and new technology, and drive transformation through their supply chains. If not managed well, they can destroy value and drain money out of the fiscus. We must exercise the political will and astute management to ensure our state-owned companies remain strong contributors to national development and inclusive growth. As government, we need to maintain a business-friendly operating environment. We need to maintain open communication and a collaborative posture. Government must conclude and implement policies which will advance inclusive growth and provide policy certainty. We need fully to harness the developmental potential of our infrastructure development programs. Infrastructure investment needs to drive industrialization, localization, and empowerment of black people, women, youth, cooperatives, and SMMEs. The same holds true for government's procurement spend, which we must boldly utilize to empower black people, to support black-owned and black-controlled SMMEs, cooperatives, suppliers, industrialists, and entrepreneurs. To empower black people is not to commit corruption. To associate black empowerment with corruption is divisive and serves only to force the nation to drift apart. Creating new wealth and expanding the country's wealth base is in our urgent national interest, as it in turn expands our tax base. We must address urgently the structural reforms in the economy as stipulated in the 9-point plan, so that we can industrialize our economy, among others through increasing the agricultural value chain, beneficiation, and more effective implementation of higher impact industrial policy action plan, unlocking the potential of SMMEs, cooperatives, townships, and rural enterprises, growing the ocean economy, such as the shipping and storage of energy products, and encouraging private sector investment. In this regard, the ANC has a very urgent responsibility before it to unite in capital letters. Yes. The politics of our country today is too polarized, and that is what happens when the politics are personalized and not focused on issues. In this regard, let me refer you to what the ANC Youth League said in 1944, 73 years ago, that I quote: "The African National Congress is the symbol and embodiment of the Africans' will to present a united national front against all forms of oppression," close quote. Whilst noting the severe criticism of the Congress that existed at the time, they went further to say, I quote again, "Defects in the organization of the people against oppression cannot be cured by mounting criticisms and not putting our heads together to build what has been damaged and to find a way out of the present situation. Both the oppression and the causes that give rise to the criticisms of Congress cannot be allowed to go on indefinitely. Soon the point must be reached when African youth, which has lived through oppression from the cradle to the present, calls a halt to it all. That point, happily, is now reached, close quote. In this regard, we too should repeat that the point is now reached, that we should call a halt to the ravaging divisions within the Congress that we, the leaders of the movement, are always happy to take to the public in utter violation of the fundamental principles of the Congress and the values it espouses and holds dear. I wish accordingly to make bold to say that we, ANC leaders, are not properly managing internal debates and differences within the ANC. This conduct has become so ensconced that there is a danger that there is a generation of young people who may grow up within the ANC, who will never know the glorious ANC we ourselves found when we joined it. This misconduct, characterized by a brazen desecration of the ANC, the entrenchment of factions and stubborn unwillingness to hear one another, compromise and accommodate each other's views, has created a situation in which society itself is divided. I wish to reiterate a fact we have always been taught by our predecessors, that one, the ANC is the glue that binds our society together. Two, the ANC is the liberator of society. And three, the ANC is the great educator, organizer, and mobilizer of the masses of our people. Consequently, if we divide and weaken the ANC, we accordingly weaken the glue that binds our society together, and we run the risk of splitting society into its different splinter elements. Unity is not a commodity that can be traded at the auction to the highest bidder. Neither is unity a mechanical process that can be fixed as can a car. Unity is a political process that must be built painstakingly, and nobody must take this for granted or feel that they have no responsibility towards it. I am saying all of this because I am trying to plead for unity around pursuing accelerated and inclusive growth, and this unity will not be achieved unless the ANC is united and in turn focuses all its energies on uniting the nation behind a common agenda. In Chapter 6 of the ANC Strategy and Tactics, the ANC characterizes itself as a national liberation movement that must utilize our political power to advance the goals of creating a non-racial, non-sexist, united, democratic and prosperous society as reflected in the national constitution that must lead the motive forces of the NDR and build broader partnerships to drive the processes of reconstruction and development, nation building and reconciliation as articulated in the National Development Plan, and that must conduct itself in line with the ideals articulated above and as the microcosm of the future. Important to note in this regard is that the ANC understands, conceptualizes and characterizes itself not in relation to its members, an organization of 100 members per branch, but in relation to the historic tasks it carries on its shoulders to implement fundamental social transformation. We have an urgent task to unite our nation. In the name of Comrade Chris Hani, let us unite our nation, our people and our movement behind the program of fundamental social change. In conclusion, I urge you all to heed Comrade Chris's call that, I quote, "What we need in South Africa is for egos to be suppressed in favor of peace." We need to create a new breed of South Africans who love their country and love everybody, irrespective of their color, close quote. And I conclude by asking, making a passionate plea for us to suppress our egos in favor of accelerated and inclusive growth, to create a new breed of South Africans who love their country and love everybody, irrespective of their color, who wish to ensure that all South Africans have a stake in the economy of the country and participate in it as the only condition to build a non-racial society. I thank you very much.
So that was the Finance Minister delivering this year's Chris Hani Memorial Lecture, and it was a call for unity in essence, and he's saying that the ANC at the crux of it all is the glue that holds society together, and a weak and divided ANC will result in a weak and divided society. He began his lecture talking about the qualities of Chris Hani, those that made Chris Hani who he was. And he says that from there he spoke about the need for accelerating economic growth in the country, and that all of the things that the country needs to do is heavily reliant on a unified country where everybody puts aside their differences, and whilst they may disagree on certain issues, that importantly that they must focus on the things that we need to do to deal with those unemployment, inequality, and other obstacles that are holding people back. He said that 10% of South Africans own 95% of the country's wealth. And he says that kind of inequality is unstable and also dangerous if people get left behind and are left out. He spoke at great length about the need for discipline, and that the party's leaders need to have better conversations within the organizations so that the youth that are coming through the system don't forget some of the values of the founding fathers, the kind of values that he himself, Malusi Gigaba, learned when he got into the movement. Again and again, he spoke about the ANC needing to be unified, and that there's an urgent need to make sure that everybody speaks in common purpose with common cause, the National Development Plan being a glue or a map in which that they can build upon the future. He detailed a lot of things such as the need for infrastructure build to be able to cause empowerment, but at the same time that this empowerment did not need to be a license for corruption. So I suppose a call to unify the party, but also that everybody in society in general should unify together and find solutions for the country, particularly at this time, to grow the economy that will deal with the problems that society are dealing with. That was Malusi Gigaba, the Finance Minister, delivering the Chris Hani Memorial Lecture in Boksburg on this day, as we remember Chris Hani, who was assassinated this day 24 years ago. And that's where we're going to leave it for the time being. Coming up, half an hour of sport with Kendall. Stay with us for that.